I don't know how you'll receive this message, but you need to wake up. Those were the words that occupied my television screen. Moments before, I'd been watching an old Western movie with my wife, sleeping peaceful in my lap. It was just past midnight, which meant I must have dozed off at some point. As the last time I checked, it had been just past 10, and work in the morning would be another exhausting adventure. But the words that had replaced the movie brought me straight back to attention. The world you live in is wrong. Wake up, Jack. I sat frozen in my comfortable chair, momentarily forgetting everything that existed around me. The name, as generic as it was, felt familiar, but it wasn't mine. My wife let out a slight groan, probably dreaming something and talking in her sleep as she often did. I considered if I'd actually fallen asleep myself if I was dreaming. The only way to make sure was by letting someone else confirm what I was actually seeing. "Mary, honey, wake up please," I said as I gently shook her. She looked so calm, as if all the horrors in the world didn't matter as long as she was safe by my side. I took a moment to just admire her, and when I looked back up, the weird message had been replaced by the roll credits of the Western movie. The clock read 1:34 a.m., meaning more than an hour had passed since the disturbing message popped up. Time had skipped, but to me, no more than a few seconds had passed. I remembered then that looking at the time while dreaming produces weird results. It had to be a nightmare, nothing more. Yet I couldn't bring myself to wake up. I convinced myself that the message had been a product of my sleep-deprived mind, that I existed somewhere on the edge of reality with one foot inside the realm of sleep. Defeated, and not feeling ready to get up for work in the morning, I just picked up a blanket and tucked my wife in. I was considering whether or not to just carry her with me to bed. It wouldn't be too hard considering my size, but I didn't want to wake her. Before I knew it, I suddenly found myself halfway up the stairs, walking towards our bedroom. I took a glance at my watch. The time read 2:04 a.m. Another half hour had just vanished. The realization hit me like a brick. I never sleepwalked before, nor did I have any history of absent seizures. Then I noticed the painting on the wall. It was one that had always been there, but one that I'd never taken a second to just observe. Realistically, I knew my wife had hung it up there when we moved in together, but it was so distant, as if it only partially existed when no one was looking. It depicted a group of people standing outside an ancient building, all of them wearing strange black gowns. In the dark, I couldn't truly tell whether it was a painting or an actual photograph, but my mind leaned towards the former. They were holding hands, but a lot of them were missing body parts. Hands, legs, one even half their head, and none of them were smiling. At the bottom, there was a piece of handwritten text. "Trial and Error, the first test, 2013, it read. The year felt so odd. Both the building and outfits seemed so much older. Just staring at it produced a growing feeling of dread within my body. Goosebumps formed on my arms, and I knew time had come to get some much-needed shut-eye. No sooner had I made that decision before the world turned dark around me. Seconds, or maybe minutes passed, and I awoke in my bed with my wife sleeping beside me. The sun had just arisen above the horizon, letting rays of warm sunlight penetrate our beige curtains. The events of the past night were already fading. It had to have been a dream. There was no other logical explanation. "Are you okay?" Mary asked, with a tired, groggy voice, as she noticed me staring out into the world outside. I was standing in front of the window, wearing the shirt and trousers I always put on for work. But I couldn't remember standing up, nor getting dressed. "You look tired. Couldn't you sleep?" I, I don't know," I stuttered. I had some weird dreams. The light outside looked so strange. It was perfect in every sense of the word, rid of any obvious faults. It shined brilliantly through the clear blue sky, only interrupted by a few pure white clouds. A brilliant orange gradient painted the horizon with trees dancing gently in the wind. "That's the third time this week, Gary." Gary. That was my name, though it felt all too foreign. I'd known it since I could form coherent words as a child, yet it somehow didn't suit me. "Maybe you should schedule another appointment with Dr. June," Mary suggested. I agreed, only because I'd known him for years. He'd helped me through some trauma, though I couldn't fathom how he'd possibly analyze my dreams in any meaningful way. I called him after breakfast, and to my luck, he just happened to have a free session that morning. I let my job know I'd be late due to an appointment. As usual, they were more than happy to accommodate me. "Gary, it's great to see you on this fine morning," Dr. June said with his usual level of enthusiasm as he welcomed me into his office. He'd always called me by my first name, claiming it made people feel more comfortable, letting them open up more. I couldn't deny that claim. The man knew pretty much everything about me. I told him about my dreams, and he jotted a few notes down into his book as he passively listened. "Gary, why don't you tell me what you think these dreams mean?" It was such an obvious question, yet I never saw it coming. I hadn't thought much about it. My concern was mainly getting rid of them, not understanding them. Though lately, I'd struggled to figure out whether or not they were truly dreams and not a twisted version of reality. "It's like my life isn't real," I finally answered. "Sometimes I have flashes, pictures of people I don't know, but they all seem so familiar. I don't understand." He asked me a few more questions after that, before sighing and looking at me. "Gary, we've been talking about your dreams now for the better part of this year, and they're not getting better. While I'm not ready to give you a certain diagnosis, I'd like to put you on some kind of medication." "Drugs? What kind?" I asked. He sighed again. "That's the thing, Gary. If I tell you how it works, you might be resistant to it. This medication is brand new, and I've had good results with other patients suffering similar world-breaking ideas. I'd like to put you on it for just a few weeks. If it works, great, we'll talk again. If not, or if you suffer from any side effects, we'll just stop the treatment. I'm not supposed to do it this way, so I need to know if you're on board." I looked at him with a questionable expression plastered on my face. He'd always been good to me, never doubting nor judging my stories. I trusted him more than most, so despite not being one to trust unknown drugs, I decided to give the treatment a shot. "All right, Doc. You know best, I suppose." He handed me an unmarked bottle of pills with the simple instructions of taking one each day before going to bed. That was all it would take to cure me of an undiagnosed disease that had been plaguing me for months. Once the session had ended, I headed to work on foot. My car was stored safely in a nearby garage, and I needed the fresh air to clear my head. My mind drifted to the deepest parts of my mind, and as it did, the same weird flashes passed before my eyes. Images of people, places and times that felt familiar, yet all too distant. They weren't mine. They couldn't possibly be. Yet they were there. I was only jolted back into the world outside as I heard the faint sounds of someone crying. It was a girl sobbing in the distance. Her voice echoed unnaturally through the busy streets. And while it took me a while to pinpoint their exact origins, I saw her standing in an alleyway on the other side of the road, ignored by the dozens of pedestrians walking by. I hesitated for a moment, worrying that it might look odd for a massive guy to approach a strange child. But I figured I could help by at least calling the police or aid her in finding her parents. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked calmly as I approached her. She couldn't have been older than 8. She wore a school uniform and had bright blonde hair. "Where's your mom and dad?" I asked. She looked at me with a mildly shocked expression on her face. "They're not here. I want to go home," she said. "Where do you live?" She looked around herself. "I don't know. I don't like it here. This isn't real. I want to go home," she repeated. "What do you mean, this isn't real?" "Nothing is real. My parents were gone. The new ones aren't the real ones. They're not my parents. No one is real." She was getting increasingly more upset with each question, but what she said struck an eerie chord with me. Before I got the chance to ask any further questions, I heard the sound of sirens appear behind me. A police car parked on the side of the road, and a couple of police officers emerged. "Joanna?" one of them asked. The little girl looked at me. "Don't let them take me," she yelled with fear in her voice. "Joanna, it's okay. We're going to bring you back to your mommy and daddy," the policeman said. "No!" she screamed in protest as he approached her. "You're not real. Go away." I looked back and forth between the little girl and the police officers that seemed as confused as myself. "Hey, wait a minute," I tried to interject. "Sir, the girl is sick. She needs help," they argued back before I could make my case. "But just stay back, all right? We'll take care of it from here." She turned around to run, but there was only one exit out from the alleyway, and it was blocked by the officers. Though my first instinct was to help, I didn't want to get arrested or worse. They seemed genuinely interested in helping her, and logically I could understand why. But despite their actions making perfect sense, the situation just didn't sit right with me. "Please don't let them take me away," she cried again. She was taken away before I could properly process what had happened. In my mind, I promised myself to call and check up on her. But once she was out of sight, it was as if my brain struggled to recall what had happened just moments before. Whatever the case, work beckoned, and I had to go. It wouldn't be a particularly productive day, but my job entailed little more than tedious paperwork. Whether or not I was actually working, no one would ever know as long as I pretended to look busy. Once at my desk, I pulled the little bottle of pills out to study them. The box wasn't labeled, nor did it come with instructions. It was just a container holding 30 small, white, and indistinct pills. I rolled one of them between my fingers, trying to understand how something so small could possibly change my life. While the little pill lay in my hand, my computer screen suddenly came to life. It was just a black image with a bit of text centered in the middle. "Don't do it, Jack." It lasted for a split second before going back to normal. Just that simple message, nothing more, nothing less. Whether they were talking about the pills, or if they meant something else entirely I didn't know. Whatever the case, I couldn't stay at work. I told my boss I was feeling sick, and like the great man he'd always been, he let me go home early. Once there, I just collapsed on the couch in front of the TV. Mary wouldn't be home for several hours, working overtime trying to complete a project, but I didn't mind. I made my way to the fridge looking for some food. There was a plate of my favorite meal prepared by my wife.
I know you're under a lot of pressure. I just want you to know that I'm always here for you. Hopefully this makes you feel a bit better. Love you, Mary.
I let a brief smile break out. The first one in over a week. She truly was the best thing that had ever happened to me. I needed to get healthy again, if only for her sake. A modicum of happiness built up inside me as I devoured the meal in front of the television, each bite as perfect as the last. On the side table beside me stood the bottle of pills, and the time for the first one was nearing. I picked it up and held it in my hands as I kept my eyes glued to the movie I was watching. Then, as I twisted the lid off, I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. Then the television screen turned dark, filled with little more than a simple sentence. "Don't take the pill, Jack." That was the last push I needed to bring me over the edge. I didn't know whether or not I'd lost my mind, but I didn't care. "What the fuck do you want from me?" I shouted at the television. "Look at the painting," was all I got in response. At first, I didn't understand what they meant. It was such a nonsensical message on its own. But then I realized how I'd been extraordinarily fascinated by the painting on the stairs the day before. How I'd been frozen in place before it for almost an hour. The black screen turned back to the movie, and I put the bottle of pills down. I walked over to the stairs with the weird picture hanging on the wall halfway up. The sun had just set, casting eerie shadows throughout the house. It obscured the picture to the point where I still couldn't tell whether it was a photograph or a realistic painting. Time passed, and it started getting darker outside. Still, I just kept staring, not sure what I was looking for.
Gary? What the hell are you doing?
My wife called as she found me standing on the stairs.
I've been trying to call you for hours. Why didn't you pick up?
Hours had passed, and evening had turned into early night. It had just passed 11 p.m., and Mary had been stuck working overtime, trying to get in touch. I'd been standing there, staring at the picture for hours. "The picture, where did you get it?" I asked. Mary looked at me dumbfounded before turning her attention towards the picture on the wall. A confused expression formed on her face, and she approached me to inspect it.
I don't really know. I never noticed the picture before. It was just kind of there.
Her comment confirmed every bit of oddity surrounding the picture. I reached my hands to remove it, but Mary grabbed my arms just before I could reach it, stopping me. "Why are you stopping me?" I asked.
I don't know. I'm just scared.
I felt it too. The hesitation and worry about what lay behind it. Still, I grabbed it and unhinged it from the wall. Once gone, all it revealed was a spot of absolute nothing.
What is that?
Mary asked in shock. I hadn't the faintest clue how to answer the question, because what existed behind the painting was literally nothing. A hole in the fabric of reality had existed long before our times in that house. At least I knew it wasn't just a dream. The world was real, but something had gone horribly wrong, and for some reason, I knew it would only get worse from there.